When we think about the story of the Buddha, we often picture this one singular moment of enlightenment. But what if that wasn't the whole story? Today, we're going to explore how the Buddha's teachings weren't just a revelation that came out of nowhere, but actually a masterful synthesis, born from a world that was in a deep state of crisis. It's a really powerful image, isn't it? A solitary figure under a tree, and then bam, a lightning bolt of insight. But is that really how it happened? Was this a completely new philosophy, something that just appeared in a vacuum? Well, there's another way to look at this. What if the Buddha's teachings were actually a deeply pragmatic, just a brilliant response to a very specific historical moment, a time of profound social and intellectual upheaval? Let's dive in and take a look at the world that actually shaped his ideas. To really understand the solution, you have to first understand the problem. And our story begins way back in the 5th century BCE, in the Gangetic Plain of India. This period, it's known as the Second Urbanization, was a time of just radical change, a real crucible of new thought. So what was driving all this change? Well, for one, new iron technology led to these huge agricultural surpluses. And what does that fuel? The growth of massive fortified cities. With these cities came a new merchant class, and all of a sudden, the old collective tribal ethics of the Vedic world, they just started to crumble. They were replaced by this new and often very anxious urban individualism. The old answers simply didn't fit the new questions anymore. Into this spiritual vacuum came the Shramanas. These were wandering ascetics who completely rejected the old Brahminical authority. And this created a vibrant and, let's be honest, probably very confusing intellectual battlefield. I mean, you had fatalists who believed your destiny was totally pre-written. You had materialists who argued there's nothing after death, that's it. And you had Jains who were proposing this very physical model of karma. This was the marketplace of ideas that the young seeker Siddhartha Gautama stepped right into. Now, Siddhartha didn't just dismiss these ideas. He decided to test them. His first great experiment was to explore what was really the dominant path at the time, the path of the mind, mastering the highest possible states of meditation. And he didn't just dabble in it either. He went out and sought the most renowned teachers of his day, and he completely mastered their techniques. He reached the absolute summit of consciousness, achieving these states of pure, objectless subjectivity, states that many people at the time considered the final goal. But even at that absolute peak, he realized something incredibly profound. These blissful, empty states, they were temporary. They were constructed, or conditioned, phenomena. And while they offered a nice shelter from suffering for a while, they didn't end it. The underlying causes were still there. So the mental path alone, he concluded, was not the answer. So having found the limits of pure mental refinement, he turned to the other popular extreme of his day, the belief that you could purify your soul by punishing your body. And he embarked on this 6-year experiment with the most severe forms of asceticism you can imagine. You see, the prevailing view at the time, especially from the Jains, was that karma was a kind of physical material that literally clung to your soul. But Siddhartha's experiment led him to ask a radical question. What if karma isn't really about what you do, but about why you do it? And this comparison just shows the revolutionary shift he was making. The Jain view saw karma as a kind of physical dust that you had to burn off through austerity. But the Buddha's insight was that karma is cetana, it's intention, it's a mental seed. This pivot from a physical model to a psychological one was an absolutely monumental shift. It meant liberation wasn't about punishing the body, it was about purifying the mind. The real breakthrough moment came when, emaciated and near death, he remembered something from his childhood. He recalled sitting under a rose apple tree, and he had spontaneously entered this state of joyful, meditative absorption. And right then, he realized that not all pleasure was bad. Sure, there was sensual, grasping pleasure. But there was also this wholesome, clear joy. And this kind of joy could actually be a tool, a source of strength on the path to awakening. Okay, so having tested the extremes of both meditation and asceticism, the Buddha was finally ready to forge his own path. But he didn't start from scratch. Nope, instead, he strategically re-engineered the most powerful concepts of his time. So in the Brahmanical world, the ultimate mark of a spiritual master was something called tevijja, or the triple knowledge. Now this meant having a perfect word-for-word memory of the 3 sacred Veda texts. It was all about knowledge based on tradition and scripture.
The Buddha takes this really prestigious term, but he completely redefines it. For him, the triple knowledge wasn't about memorizing a book. It was about what you could see for yourself, through your own direct insight, the reality of rebirth, the mechanics of karma, and finally, the path to liberation itself. He basically shifted the entire basis of authority from scripture to verifiable personal experience.
And he did the same thing with the central metaphor of the Vedic tradition, fire. While Brahmin priests were tasked with keeping a sacred ritual fire perpetually burning, the Buddha used this very image to deliver a shocking diagnosis. He said, "You don't need to light a fire. Your senses are already on fire, burning with greed, hatred, and delusion. The goal, therefore, wasn't to tend the fire, but to achieve nibbana, which literally means to extinguish these internal flames."
So, having deconstructed the old models, the Buddha then presented his own. And the way he framed it was perhaps his most pragmatic and revolutionary move of all. Think about this. He didn't present himself as a prophet demanding that you believe him. He presented himself as a physician diagnosing a universal ailment. This approach was so practical, so empirical, and so accessible. He wasn't offering a set of beliefs to be accepted on faith, but a therapy to be applied and tested for yourself.
And this just brilliantly illustrates his method. The structure of his most famous teaching, the Four Noble Truths, directly mirrors the standard medical formula used by Ayurvedic physicians of his day. It's so clear. First, the diagnosis of the illness. Second, the cause. Third, the prognosis that yes, a cure is possible. And finally, the prescription for treatment. It's a clear, logical, and actionable framework for healing. So at the end of the day, the Buddha's teaching was this powerful synthesis. He took the meditative rigor from one camp, the ethical urgency from another, and even the vocabulary of the establishment, but he rejected their extremes and their fatal flaws. He navigated right between the idea of an eternal, unchanging soul and the idea of complete annihilation at death to forge an entirely new path. And that really brings us to the ultimate takeaway. By psychologizing karma, by internalizing ritual, and by framing truth as a kind of therapy, the Buddha's final message was one of profound human autonomy. Liberation wasn't something you prayed for or something granted by a god. No, it was a skill to be developed, a cognitive event based on seeing things clearly. And that's why this origin story matters so much. It shows us that at its very core, this is a path built on the understanding that we have the power to extinguish our own fires.